Griffith for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Stark, let me ask you a question. A problem has come to my attention in Virginia, which all the way across the country from you, and it may not be the same in the state of Washington. But we have a dilemma because in order to be eligible for Medicaid, you have to have limited assets. It used to be $2,000. That may have gone up in the last year or two. But it used to be $2,000 were all you could have in assets in order to be eligible for Medicaid. So a situation has come to my attention where a lady has assets. She generates $9,000 a year from those assets. She's not yet old enough. She's a widow, but she's not old enough yet apparently to be in Medicare. And when she goes on the website, she's not offered a supplement in Obamacare because she would theoretically, based on her income level, be eligible for Medicaid. But because she has assets, that's where her small income comes from. She happens to be caring also for apparently a disabled child. She's not eligible for a supplement, and with $9,000 a year in income, she cannot afford health insurance. Is that problem nationwide, or is that just a Virginia-specific problem?
I think potentially that would be a nationwide problem. It's the way the system is set up.
So it's going to apply in any state depending on what the number is. If you have assets, you're going to have to sell your assets in order to qualify for Medicaid, and you won't be able to buy health insurance.
Potentially, I would say, yeah.
It's interesting because this lady, in speaking to a friend of mine, said, I thought Obamacare was supposed to help people like me, and apparently it's not helping her because she's not going to be able to get any assistance whatsoever. And in some cases, I understand the asset may even be the home that they're living in if it's a single person living in that home where you don't have another person who may have ownership in the house. Is that also your understanding?
Yeah, I think an asset is an asset, yeah.
So in theory, they can either be uninsured, which is where they may have been anyway, but in theory they can either be uninsured or homeless. Isn't that correct?
That's, I guess by your definition, yeah, the way you're putting this, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of a tough situation. Mr. Roy, would you like to comment on that? Do you have any different perspective?
The biggest problem, there are a number of problems with the way the mandate is enforced. But I would say that in general, people can reorganize their income or sometimes misreport their income in order to avoid the mandate and maximize the subsidies.
Well, now, we don't want to encourage anybody to misreport their income because that gets off close to fraud, but how would you manage that asset?
Well, if your income is below that required to file a tax return, the mandate doesn't apply to you, for example.
Oh, so she wouldn't have to pay she wouldn't have to pay the fine for being poor and having an asset, but she still wouldn't have insurance.
That's correct.
Okay, so that's how she would manage her asset.
That could be that is one option, quote unquote.
One option, as long as she didn't have to file any tax return with the IRS.
Right. Because the IRS otherwise can't verify your income, and the law actually explicitly states that if you don't file a tax return, if you don't need to file a tax return, the mandate doesn't apply to you.
Mr. Griffith, if I could mention a parallel problem
Sure.
that I would hope that the committee would try to ask the GAO to look at on a bipartisan basis. This country runs its defense these days a lot on young men and women who go in and out of the Reserve and National Guard into full-time deployment and then come back. The ACA does not fit very well people whose income goes up and down. The enrollment periods don't fit their employment. We need to be looking at some sort of grace period for people coming back from deployment under this circuit. That's another group of young people who I think are going to be very alienated from this system if we don't figure out a way to treat them better.
Well, and I appreciate that, and obviously we've heard about a lot of problems not only today but other times, and you know, when you have constituents who were supposed to be helped by this program who find themselves not being helped and actually having equal or greater dilemmas than they had before, it just makes you realize, although I was not here at the time, that this wasn't a carefully crafted piece of legislation, and as a result we have a very flawed law. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen. Now recognize the gentlelady from North Carolina, Ms. Elmers, 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to ask every panelist here a very simple question. I just want to kind of follow up on some of the comments and exchanges that have taken place.